We're studying from the book of Exodus, and we're about to begin chapter 2. If you'd like to open your Bibles there, Exodus chapter 2. Before we begin, let's bow our heads, a word of opening prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we approach your throne this day, thanking you for this day, for all the blessings that we receive, for the rain, for this season of time, this time of the year that we have, and we ask that you continue to bless us in the future as you have in the past. We're especially mindful of the spiritual blessings we receive through your Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for our sins. We ask that you'll bless us in this hour of Bible study that's been set aside and help us to gather from it the things that we stand in need of, that we might be better servants of yours. We're thankful for the ability to come together with those of like precious faith, to study from your word, to worship you in spirit and truth, and to do so without any reasonable fear. We're so thankful for this and hope and pray that it continues for many years to come. We ask that you bless our congregation here, the efforts that we put forth, that the borders of your kingdom might be expanded, that we might have souls be saved because of our efforts, and that they would come to you and help us to be good examples and help us to always preach your word so that others may hear it and glorify you in heaven. We ask that you bless those who are sick of our number and are unable to be out with us at this time, that you would strengthen them and encourage them, and if it be your will, to heal them and restore them to the portion of health they need, that they might be able to attend with us once more. Forgive us of our wrongs. We know that we sin. We fall short of your glory, but we're so thankful that the gift that you give us is eternal life through your Son, Jesus Christ. We ask all of these favors and blessings and thanks we give through his name. And amen. Chapter 2 is going to introduce to us Moses. Now, Moses, of course, is the writer not only of the book of Exodus, but also of the book of Genesis as well. So we don't even hear about Moses until this chapter. But Moses is the author of all of these books, the first 5 books, with the exception of perhaps the appendixes at the end, or probably Joshua that finishes up after Moses dies. But for the most part, these are all referred to and have been referred to as the books of Moses. And he begins by not introducing his parents by name, but he says, "And there went a man of the house of Levi and took a wife, a daughter of Levi." Now we know their names, don't we? I think we do. But you have to wait to chapter 6 before you find those names out. The man's name was Amram. What was his wife's name? Anybody? Jochebed. Yes, Jochebed. That's kind of an interesting name. It always amazes me. There are certain names that catch on, that sound good to our English ears, that we use. And there are other names that don't sound so good. For whatever reason, we don't have too many ladies walking around with the name Jochebed today. I'm not sure what that is, or Amram for that matter. I don't know, maybe someone might consider naming their son Amram. But these are good people. Obviously, God has chosen people out of a religious group of people, the Levites who would become the priestly tribe, and they would not even be counted as far as the possessions in the land. When they enter into the land of Canaan, they would be to dwell throughout be dispersed through all of the tribes, and they could own land, they could purchase land, but they did not have a land that was given to them as their own inheritance, like the land of Judah, or the land of Simeon, or the land of Ephraim, or the land of Manasseh. Any of these tribes actually got their own parcel of land in the land of Canaan, but Levi did not, because God said, "I am your portion." You don't get a portion in the land. But did that mean that the Levites were at a disadvantage? Absolutely not. In fact, even at the time of Jesus, the Levites were quite wealthy. They had all kinds of holdings, and that might have been part of the reason for the corruption that existed in Jerusalem and Judea during the time that Christ was here in this world. But at the beginning of everything, God chose this family out of the Levite tribes to bear Moses, and he was the one that God chose to deliver the people of Israel. Okay, in verse 2, and the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him, that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. Now, this isn't her first child, is it? She already has two, an older son and an older daughter before Moses is born. But she bears a son. And remember, we just discussed in the last chapter, what were they to do with their sons? Throw them into the river, right? Cast them into the river. And when she saw the baby, she said, I can't do this. This is a perfectly good baby. When a mother beholds her child for the first time, someone says, well, it's just biology, it's just chemistry, it's just this or that. I'm going to scratch all that. There's a spiritual bond. There's a connection there. And I've witnessed that 3 times myself, being in the room with my wife when she had all 3 of my sons. And it was just like the radar just locked on to that baby just as soon as he was born. And there's something about that when a mother has a child, a baby, whether it's a son or a daughter, that they are just locked in from that point on. It's just an amazing thing to behold. And I believe that that's the case here. When she saw him, she said, he's a goodly child. What's that mean, that he was a goodly child? Yeah, he was a beautiful baby. All right. I don't know any mother that would ever look at her own baby and say he's ugly. But you know what? This one here, at least in her eyes, he was beautiful to behold. But we're going to find out he was beautiful in someone else's eyes, which probably spared his life. And that would be Pharaoh's daughter here in a little bit. But here she sees him. He's a goodly child, and she is not going to have him thrown into the river, is she? Despite the edict of the king or Pharaoh. Right? When she could no longer hide him, she hid him 3 months. All right. That would have been difficult to do, to hide a newborn baby for 3 months. Why is that? I've been chuckling at Matthew's newborn baby. He's got one of them real deep voices. When he cries, it's real. I find that, I just chuckle and I laugh and I find that amusing. And Matthew looked at me and said, well, I guess it would be in little doses. But but yeah, babies cry a lot, don't they? Because they're selfish little monsters that are born in sin, right? Absolutely not. How would you know that the baby needed anything? He's not going to look at you, he or she is not going to look at you and carry on a conversation and say, look, my stomach's hurting, I'm hungry, I need something to eat. They don't know how to do that. What does a baby know how to do? He knows how to cry. And you can't ignore that for very long, can you? Okay? Not if you have a heart. If you have a heart, you just, poor baby. Baby's crying. What's the matter? What's the matter? Sometimes you don't know what's the matter. You just try to comfort them and try to calm them down. But that's babies, right? Can you imagine how hard it would be to calm a baby down, keep that baby quiet for 3 months? She hid him for 3 months. That's a difficult thing to do. But when she could no longer hide him, verse 3, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's brink. A lot to unpack in this verse here. All right, what's an ark? Little boat, a square box, a container. Okay. Uh, when you think of the uses of this word, the three major uses we find of the word ark. Ark, we think of, first of all, think of Noah, right? That was a big one. That's a big box, isn't it? A great big vessel to contain the animals and the 8 souls saved on the ark. Then you have the Ark of the Covenant, which was not a boat, but it was a box, but it was a container. And that's what this is. This is an ark, a box, a basket, if you will, that would contain Moses. Now, what it says here is she also, she made it out of bulrushes, which is what? Cattails, basically, reeds. I believe the English Standard refers to this as papyrus. It might have been. Papyrus is very common in this area. Of course, we know that papyrus is used, especially the stalks, beaten flat and then woven together and dried and made into paper. Writing, a place to write things down. A lot of documents have been preserved on papyrus. Problem with that is they don't last all that long. They're not like when we talk about the phrase written in stone. There's a good reason for that, because things that are written in stone last a lot longer than things that are written on papyrus, right? Number one problem you have with papyrus is it doesn't last long because it is very biodegradable. It will deteriorate, and it will go back into the ground to provide nourishment for new plants. Rocks, of course, and stones, they'll last a little longer, a little bit harder. So if you carve something in stone, it usually lasts a good bit longer. The other problem is with the ink. The indelible ink is a fairly recent invention. Okay, and and even that is not 100%. Even what we call indelible ink today, there's ways for that to dissolve as well. So it could be used for that. It was also used for food. They would strip the inside out, the pulp of it out, and it made food. But this was a woven basket of these reeds that were growing down, probably close to the river. She made an ark out of that. And Dave, you had a comment before we go on.
So she laid it in the flags. Now, this papyrus, I've never seen it in the wild.
Mm-hmm.
Will it move to the wind like a flag? And this flag, the definition of flag stands for basically what we know today, like something waving in the wind.
Right.
Is that still flag?
I would say so. It might also be camouflaged quite a bit too because of what it's made out of. Because it's made out of reeds anyway, and there's reeds growing by the river, so that would camouflage it a little bit too. Remember, she's hiding him. She doesn't want him to be seen. Now, in order to make it seaworthy, if you will, make it to where it'll float, she daubs it with slime and pitch. Okay? Pitch being tar, all right? The slime might have been a type of mud. I believe the English Standard uses the word bitumen. Well, I'm not 100% sure of that or where they come up with that. I have to look into that a little bit further. But it's the idea, we know what it was used for. It was to seal this basket. It wouldn't have been very big, just big enough for a 3-month-old baby to be able to be held afloat. So it wouldn't have to be very big, all right? And then laying it in the flags by the river's bank. It's important that she did this because if she just tossed it out into the river somewhere where there weren't any reeds growing, where would the basket have gone? It just flowed with the river, all right? In this case, it would have flowed north, all right? We often think, well, rivers flow down and south is down. Actually, it's relative, but the Nile River flows north into the Mediterranean Sea, so it would have floated up north, which would have been downstream in the Nile River. But because she placed it in the flags, that would have been enough resistance to hold it in place there. Okay. She had it placed there, and it may have been that she did this purposefully. We don't know, it doesn't tell us, but apparently somebody had a habit of going down to this particular area and bathing. And it may be that Jochebed knew this and thought that maybe, just maybe, this might work out. We don't know. There's no indication that Jochebed knew Pharaoh's daughter or ever had any conversation with her. But if she did, she might have thought, well, she's a kind-hearted person. It doesn't, we think of the Egyptians as being the bad guys in this whole scenario. Really, they weren't. Pharaoh was, certainly. But the Egyptians were not all terrible, awful people, although they were involved in paganism and idolatry. Yet they not necessarily were they all bad people. They might have had a lot of good people, good qualities. Certainly, the daughter of Pharaoh seems to have a tender heart. So this is a good thing. Maybe she knew this. Maybe she thought this. Maybe she just desperately put him there hoping that here's someone in authority that might be able to help me out of this situation. Maybe. We don't know. But, and obviously God's behind the whole thing, right? God's taking care of the situation. There's no doubt about that. Okay, so, and as far as him being a goodly child, that's going to come up too. The idea is that he wasn't hard on the eyes, right? He was very cute. And babies are. Babies are. You just, when you see a little baby crying, doesn't your heart just melt? I know mine does, all right? No matter how big you are and how gruff you might be, those babies cry. Usually it just breaks your heart. This just melts you, doesn't it? Well, that's going to work to Moses' advantage here, that he is a goodly child. Okay, now verse 4 says, and his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done with him. Wit or witness this, to observe him, to watch him, to see what would happen. Okay, so she's kind of keeping an eye on her little brother, her little baby brother. And we know that her name was Miriam, right? We understand that that's going to be mentioned later in chapter 6 as well. Okay, so she's watching, and verse 5 says, and the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. When she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. Now, again, we're not told that Jochebed did this purposefully, but it sort of seems like she might have had this in mind, that she knew Pharaoh's daughter had the habit of coming down here to bathe in the river. Maybe thought, here's someone that might be in a position to help. And really she's not really any worse off because the edict is throw him in the river. Maybe Pharaoh's daughter will see him and maybe have some pity on him and help him out and help them out of that situation. Okay? Maybe. We don't know, but it sure seems that she had that in mind. Again, we know God was behind the whole thing. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. Babies cry, don't they? The baby was crying, and she had compassion on him. No surprise there, huh? And said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So there's no mistaking. She knows exactly what the problem is. This baby was to be thrown into the river. All right. So in a sense, she kind of obeyed the king's edict because she did put him in the river. He didn't say anything about making an ark of bulrushes and pitching it inside and out so it'll float. But she did actually put him in the river, didn't she? Okay. So she didn't really disobey Pharaoh. She just didn't allow the baby to be killed. She put him in the basket. And when Pharaoh's daughter saw the baby crying, she had compassion on him. So you just like that maternal instinct that kicks in biologically, if you will, with a mother who gives birth, here is that maternal instinct that's kicking in to Pharaoh's daughter when she sees him. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? Boy, that was convenient. Miriam here, it just sounds like she kind of thought this thing through, didn't she? That maybe if she decides to take this child on, that she's going to need a nurse, she's going to need someone to feed him, going to need someone to take care of him. And since he is a Hebrew baby, a Hebrew nurse would be someone who is able to nurse him, would be able to take care of him. And that would be appropriate, wouldn't it? Okay? So again, it just almost seems, now I know God's got this plan in mind, but it kind of seems like maybe Jochebed thought this thing through. Maybe worked this out during the 3 months that the baby was in the world and she was hiding him after he came into the world. I don't know. It doesn't say, but it certainly would make sense that she did. Dave, you had something? Okay, you got it? Okay. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. The perfect solution, right? There she not only gets to have her baby saved, but she also gets to nurse him and raise him up until he's weaned. Well, you can't ask for too much more than that, huh? And there is an influence here that is going to take place. There's no doubt about that. Although, again, it doesn't come out and in so many words say Jochebed taught Moses who he was and who the people were, who the Hebrews were, and what the Egyptians were doing to the Hebrews. It doesn't say that. It doesn't come right out and say, this is what Jochebed taught her son. But did she teach him this? I think we can infer it, because Moses knows who he is. Doesn't seem to be, see, that's one of the problems I have with, there's an animated movie, it was called Prince of Egypt, where Moses didn't even know who he was, all right, in that, and then finally it's revealed to him, and he comes to that knowledge, and then he realizes why he has a longing for the people and why he defends the one Israelite against the Egyptian taskmaster. But that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems that Moses knows exactly who he is all the way through. It doesn't say that it was just revealed to him later on in life. It seems that his mother must have had this influence on him. All right, so the Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages." And the woman took the child and nursed it. Jochebed took her own son back home. Now she has the blessing of Pharaoh's daughter, and she's got wages in order to take care of her family while she's at it. So she's not only going to have her baby spared, not only going to get to raise and nurse the child till he's weaned, but she's also going to be paid to do it. Any blessings there? It's all blessing, isn't it? There's no doubt about the hand of God's involved here. Maybe Jochebed worked this out in her mind, thought, well, maybe something will happen that he'll be spared, but she couldn't have hoped for much more than that, huh? Not only was she going to find her baby spared, but he's going to even be nursed by her, raised by her, at least for a certain time, and then she's also going to receive wages to be able to afford things, to be able to take care of the baby and her other family. Okay? And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son, and she called his name Moses. For she said, because I drew him out of the water. Okay, so until the child was weaned, when he started on solid food, she brought him in to the house of Pharaoh's daughter, and he became Pharaoh's daughter's son. Okay, so, and we're going to also find out that from other passages that Moses was a learned man, learned in all the ways of the Egyptians. He knew all of the things. He was brought up with the very best education that he could possibly get in that day from the most powerful nation that existed at the time. And they had probably more knowledge there than any other nation. And he was given the very best of tutelage as he grows up. And he's raised as a daughter of Pharaoh. So that tells you something right there, that he could even be in line for the throne. It's a possibility at least, right? So in that way, the movie The Prince of Egypt, I think, had that part right. But she called his name Moses because she drew him out of the water. The word Moses means to draw out. To draw out. So yes, it has the connotation of being drawn out of the river, but Moses also drew out the children of Israel too, didn't he? Drew them out of the land of Egypt. See, names have a significance, don't they? Today, I think in our culture today, when we name a child, we name a child for several different reasons. Sometimes, well, his great-grandfather was named this, or his dad was named this, or we just like the sound of it. We don't generally look at the etymology of the name to see where it came from, what it means. But people at this time did take the time to name their children either for the expectations of them or something that, an event that happened around their birth, things of that nature. Names had a bigger significance, I believe, back at this time. Okay, and when it was come to pass in those days, and it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. Now, there's a lot of details are skipped here that we just don't know. We're not privy to. Just says the child grew up. And when he did, he went out to see his people. But what's not said there is how he came to know this, but it just seems to be implied because of being brought up by Jochebed up to a certain point at least. And even though he is the son of Pharaoh's daughter, she's raising him as her own, yet apparently there is still some influence there from his family. Somehow or another, they have influenced him. And so he knows who his people are. So he went out to visit his brethren, and he looked on their burdens. You get this thing about Moses, it seems that injustice seems to really bother him. People who are not being fair with others really seems to get under his skin. You're going to find this when he goes to Midian and finds the shepherds, the male shepherds that are giving Jethro's daughters a hard time at the well and feeding their flocks and their animals first and not letting them do what they needed to do. And Moses fights them all off and takes care of that situation. Because Moses seems to be a person that is concerned about injustice and people being unfair to one another. Dave? He's a protector. He's a person that, right, he wants to defend. He wants to defend the people who are defenseless. And that's a good quality. However, his choice here is probably not the best choice, all right? It's going to cause a lot of difficulties here. He wants to see his people freed from this slavery. And the way that he goes about it here is not going to work. You know, you can't free a nation of people from another nation of people by killing one of them at a time. It's not going to work out too well. It's going to need a little bit more than that. But verse 12 says that he looked this way and that way. When he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Okay. I would say very hastily as he kills this Egyptian and buries him in the sand. This is a very shallow grave, okay, to bury a man in the sand. So he's not going to stay hidden for very long, okay. And when he went out the second day, behold, two of the Hebrews strove together, and he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? So one of them was more in the wrong. One of them was beating on the other one. And Moses is saying, why are you doing this? Why are you fighting amongst yourselves? And so in fact, he's already made a judgment as who's in the wrong here as well. And he said, who made thee a prince and a judge over us? Well, he is, in a sense, a prince of Egypt. But who made you a prince over us, over the Hebrew people, and a judge over us? Intendest thou to kill me as thou killest the Egyptian? Uh-oh. Well, he looked this way and he looked that way, didn't see anybody, but that doesn't mean somebody didn't see him from another angle, okay? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. Okay, well, it may have been that somebody witnessed this, saw this murder. It could also be that the taskmaster who was beating the Hebrew, when Moses killed him, this Hebrew may have fled away and told everybody else what Moses did. So the word's getting around one way or the other. Either it was witnessed or by someone else or by the victim of the taskmaster. He may have been the one that spread it. We don't know exactly how. But it was known. Things like that have a way of coming out, don't they? Dave?
Flash forward, could this be the reason that the Archangel Michael and Satan contended with Moses?
It could be. We're not given much information on this. Jude brings that up. It says that Moses, when Moses died, God buried him or had him buried. Remember, we'll find out here he was buried by the Lord. And he was, but the Lord commanded his angels to take care of that. Michael, the archangel, was in charge of that, apparently. And whatever they did with the body of Moses, how they buried him, where they buried him, we don't know. There's no details that are given about that, but we do know that Michael and Satan argued with each other about the body of Moses. Why? I don't know. Why in the world, why would Satan want anything to do with the body of Moses? I don't know. But, I mean, the man's dead. What do you do with the man's body after the body is dead? Maybe because he wanted to desecrate it in some way because of the law of God coming through Moses? I don't know. But whatever the reason was, Michael, of course, doesn't charge Satan wrongly or accuse him. He just simply says, "The Lord rebuke thee." He puts it back in God's hands. That was probably enough to silence Satan there. Let the Lord take care of this. You want to handle this? Talk to God about it. Talk to him. Talk to Jehovah about it. And apparently that settled the argument. Now, again, I don't know what the particulars are of that situation. Could this be a fast forward? If we go, okay, well, Moses accusing him and said, hey, remember he murdered this man. Maybe. It could be. What does Satan do? He's called the accuser of the brethren. All right. Do you have, like the Rolling Stones, do you have any sympathy for the devil? I sure don't. Because on that day, as we stand before the throne of God, before the throne of Jesus, his son, if he's there, and I believe he will be, he's going to be saying, well, you know what this guy did over here? He's an accuser. He's an accuser. And he's the one who stirs it all up. He's the one that lays the temptations in front of us. But at the same time, it's our choices. He's the accuser of the brethren. So no sympathy from me. Not an ounce. No sympathy from me. And I certainly hope you don't either. The other day that came on the radio, off it went. Because I like to listen to some of the old classic rock stations, the old stuff, And that comes on. It comes on a lot. I don't know why it does, but boy, that goes off as soon as I know what it sounds like when it gets started, and boom, off it goes. I won't even listen. I can't tell you what the lyrics are. I've heard a few of them, but I won't listen to the song. Anyway, okay, so surely the thing is known. Now, when Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. So he goes over into Midian, close, somewhere on the Sinai Peninsula. The Midianites lived in, a lot of times they roamed around and went into different parts of the area. They exhausted resources here. They move off somewhere else where they could find some more. But the Midianites were living on the Sinai Peninsula, and apparently, and of course, this is where Moses is going to encounter God through that burning bush on the mountaintop. Okay, so it's here that Moses flees away. We learn in Acts chapter 7, Stephen gives the history lesson to the Jews, which causes them to stop and listen. He starts reciting the history. We learn that Moses was 40 years old when this happens, when he goes out to see his father-in-law, and he dwells in Midian for 40 years. So he's 80 years old by the time God calls him to come and to deliver the people of Israel out of Egypt. And then he's going to be for 40 years in the wilderness with the people of Israel. So 120 years is the life of Moses. Okay, and the thing about it was, it says, yet his natural strength was not abated, and neither was his eyesight dim. So even though he's 120 years old, boy, that's pretty good, all right? They still have a lot of natural strength. I'm sure he wasn't as spry as he was when he was 40, but he still had a lot of natural strength and still could see. He wasn't like Isaac, for example. Isaac was practically blind by the time his sons wanted to receive the blessing from him. Remember, he couldn't tell them apart. Okay, so here he goes. He sits down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So the women came out to the well. They were taking care of the flocks, their father's flocks. And the shepherds came and drove them away. All right. Why did they do this? Because they could, basically. A lot of people go by the old adage, might makes right. It's kind of the law of the jungle. The strong prevail, the weak fail. And that's exactly what's going on here is the women were not able to defend themselves against these men, and so they drove them away. All right. But Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. So Moses, I don't know how, whether he got into any fights or any scuffles with these guys, but he was able to get the ladies their turn. They had apparently had arrived there first because said they'd already filled their troughs for their flocks when these shepherds came and drove them away. All right. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that you are come so soon today?" They had some help, didn't they? Now, this man's name is Reuel. That's one of his names. How many other names does he have? I'm going to read. I heard somebody. We'll read in the book of Numbers. He goes by the name of Hobab. And of course, he's going to be referred to a lot of the times as Jethro. Okay. Are these all his names? Does he just go by several names? Possibly. It could also be that the etymology of these names is lost, and they may simply be titles too. He's also referred to as the priest of Midian. Maybe Jethro is one of those terms that describes that, or Reuel, or one of them. We don't know exactly, but he goes by several of these names. Here he's called Reuel. Later he's going to be referred to as Jethro, as we're going to find out here in just a little bit. All right, and they wanted to know, well, how did you get finished up so soon today? It usually takes a lot longer time. Well, they had some help, didn't they? And they said, an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us and watered the flock. Why did they know he was an Egyptian? Doesn't say. Maybe by his speech, maybe by the way he was dressed. Remember, Moses was raised as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. So he would have had the garb of an Egyptian, most likely. I don't necessarily would it follow that he was wrapped in the kind of clothing that the Hebrews were. That was poor people's clothing. He was a wealthy man. So very likely that the way he was dressed, possibly the way he talked, gave that away. Tina? Right. There's nothing said about having time to pack things. It seems to me like he got out of there in a hurry because he knew he was going to be pursued. And Pharaoh did seek to kill him, didn't he? As soon as he found out about it, he was sending people to take him out of the game. Dave?
I was just going to say, him being a very intelligent man and well studied, I would assume even if he was in a rush, that he would take some means of protection away.
Mm-hmm.
And typically back in those days, the sword was a little bit indicator of where he came from.
Yeah, it could have been.
Imagine, the ladies saw that, they may know, boom, immediately where he's from. He's got that very looking sword.
Mm-hmm.
I get the name of it, but they know he's an Egyptian.
Right, and it could very well be something like that, like a scimitar or something like that. Those kinds of things actually did tell where you came from to know what kind of sword a person had. So that could have very well been. It would be crazy to just venture out into the wasteland like that without any means of protection. So it's entirely conceivable that Moses would have done something like that. He might have taken a sword with him or some means of protection. Of course, they didn't have the sidearms, didn't have the pistols back then, but he would have probably had something to arm himself with. Okay? And he said unto his daughters, that's Ruel, said unto his daughters, and where is he? Why is it that ye have left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. Hospitality. Okay, this is here's a good man, a man who's come to your defense and to your aid. And of course, the women probably were a little, shy about the whole thing, being the women, that they just didn't want to assume anything. But as soon as Ruel hears this, he says, "Go find him, get him, bring him back here." That's we want to be grateful for something like this. We want to extend hospitality to him. And so, long story short, picks you up here in verse 21. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. Now, again, it's a very abbreviated account. It must have taken some time. We do know that he chose to work for Jethro, and he took care of his flocks. Ruel, Jethro, Hobab, all those names for the same man. And she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a stranger in a strange land. The English Standard, I think, says I've been a foreigner in a strange land, or something of that nature. Okay, a sojourner, if you will, a pilgrim, someone who is living in a place that's not his own. All right, he's not. This isn't his home country, but he has made it his own. A stranger in a strange land. And it came to pass in process of time that the king of Egypt died. How much time? About 40 years. And at that point, things change over. And the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage. So this new Pharaoh that comes into power, as bad as it was when Moses was there under that Pharaoh, did it get better or did it get worse? Looks like it got worse when this new Pharaoh came. This first Pharaoh was a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, or by not knowing Joseph, either he wasn't familiar with him personally, or it may just simply mean he was not in approval of the policies that Joseph had set in place when he was second in command to the Pharaoh. Even though those policies set the Egyptians up to be able to survive during that 7 years of famine. The people that lived during that time sure knew about it and sure appreciated Joseph, including the Pharaoh. But the new Pharaoh that came up was not as nice a fellow as the first one was, and this one seems to be even worse yet. Okay? And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. It's not that God has the ability to forget, but this is the time now that God is saying, okay, now it's time to work on that third promise. The second promise is fulfilled, right? Abraham's first promise was to have a son. Check that box off. And then the son is to become a great nation. You can check that box off now, because they have multiplied greatly in the land of Egypt. Now the third box is to give them a land to dwell in. But in order for them to have a land that they can call their own, they're going to have to conquer the land of Canaan. And for that to happen, they have to be released from the slavery in Egypt. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them, or in this sense, he acknowledged them. He acknowledged their sufferings. God, because things are going on like this, sufferings and painfulness, doesn't mean that God doesn't care or that he doesn't see. We oftentimes mistake the lull in the action. That God, God's not doing anything about this, so he must not care. He must not even see or care what goes on in this world. But that's not true, is it? There's reasons for God allowing certain things to happen, including suffering and pain. A lot of that we are reminded of. I keep going back to 9/11 back in 2001, and that's been over 20 years ago now. But that's hard to believe too. That much time has passed. But people saying, well, didn't God see this? Didn't God care? Why did he allow them to do this? Well, God doesn't step in and negate free will, does he? He can. He could if he desired to. But God allows people to make decisions, right or wrong. And there are consequences for the decisions we make, aren't there? It is very sad. But all this suffering that's in the world is a result of sin entering into the world. And the free will that we have here, God doesn't step in and stop us before we commit an evil act. And those men on that morning got up, fully intent on doing what they did. All right, and God didn't stop them. What if he did? Well, if he did stop them, why not stop everything? And then where does free will go after that? There is no free will then. Then we just serve God because he makes us serve him, instead of serving him in a willing way. Okay? So God knew about the suffering. He knew about the children of Israel. He knew about what was going on, and the plan was already in motion. They didn't know this yet, but Moses has been in the forge, if you will, undergoing a tempering for now 80 years. Was Moses ready to lead the children of Israel out at age 40? Nope. Nope, not a chance. Was Abraham ready to be the man who was called the friend of God and father of the faithful when he first got promised, or was it 25 years later when Isaac was born? See, there's a reason. There's a reason why the delays take place. And the same thing is true here. God is molding the man that's going to be in charge of this, to take care of the problem with the slavery in Egypt. And that brings us to chapter 3. All right. Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. So now we got a name change here. It was Reuel, right? Some people believe that Reuel was the grandfather and Jethro was his son, and maybe, but it just doesn't say that for sure. All right, but he's also called the priest of Midian. Is he a legitimate priest? Probably. There were legitimate priests before the Levitical priesthood was established. There is a guy by the name of Melchizedek you might have heard of before. He was a priest. And Abraham recognized him too because he paid tithes to him, didn't he? Paid tithes to him in the patriarchal age. We're still technically at the end of the patriarchal age here. So Jethro is a priest of Midian. And Moses, he led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. Okay, there's some discussion as, okay, Sinai, Horeb, what is it? Some have suggested that Sinai is the name of the range and Horeb is a specific peak. So we often refer to Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb, and they're a reference to the same place. But whatever the means is, and I'm not sure exactly which is correct. Some have it one way, some have it another. But it's referring to the same place. And it's here that God is going to contact Moses. Now notice verse 2, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. That's usually what we focus on, is the bush, the burning bush here. Look at the first words. I think that was the second buzzer, but look at those first words. Who was it that appeared? The angel of the Lord, all capitals, the angel of Jehovah. Who is that? Well, in our studies, we've come across this frequently. Even Jesus identifies the angel of the Lord as himself. When he refers to the angel of Jehovah, in the book of Malachi, talking about John the Baptist preparing the way for this angel of Jehovah. And he refers to John the Baptist as being this messenger going before him to prepare his way. And he himself being that messenger, indirectly, he's saying, I am this angel of the Lord, this angel of Jehovah. So it's Christ who is speaking, that God is speaking through the Word of God. John talks about that. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. That's Jesus. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So Jesus is involved even here. Even here. This is before he becomes flesh. But this is Christ that is referred to as being the one who speaks out of the bush. Okay, we're out of time. People are gathering out there. They heard me talking still, so they're not coming in. But that was the second buzzer. So we'll go ahead and pick up there, Lord willing, in our study on Wednesday evening.